guys, so I hope most of you at least spent some time going through the answers to the worksheet so that you're mostly kind of just checking. But otherwise, we're going to kind of go in order between Chapter 5 concepts to Chapter 6, and then to Chapter 7. There might be some sort of back and forth between Chapter 6 and 7 because they really are dependent on each other, right? The processes of photosynthesis and respiration. And a lot of what we have to do is kind of compare and contrast and differentiate those two different processes. So we're going to start with the Chapter 5 concepts about cell membrane movement, so diffusion, osmosis, and then we'll talk also a little bit about energy. Okay, so the first question here is just a simple question showing you that you have a cell basically with a whole bunch of solutes in it, and then you've got just a few outside. So according to diffusion, right, the movement of particles from an area, what? High to low concentration. Which way are the particles going to go? Into the cell or out of the cell? Out of the cell. They're going to go out of the cell. Okay? So those particles are going to go out of the cell. For cell B here, we've got very few particles inside the cell and a whole bunch outside of the cell. So which way are the particles going to move due to diffusion?
Inside the cell.
Inside the cell, right? From an area of high concentration to low concentration. Does that require any energy?
No.
No. And so that's called passive transport, right? Yes.
So is the first one hypotonic and the second one hypertonic? Or
It doesn't apply here because those are terms of tonicity, and that's involving osmosis.
Okay.
So we're not talking about osmosis here, just diffusion. Okay? So for number 2, it's the same basic kind of question, but it actually gives you a concentration of a solute like sugar instead of just these little symbols. So if we have a cell where the solute concentration inside the cell is 1% and outside the cell the concentration of sugar is 5%, which way is the sugar going to go? Into the cell or out of the cell? Into the cell. From an area of high concentration to low. Okay? And then this other example, 3% sugar in the cell, 1% sugar outside the cell. Which way is the sugar going to go?
Outside the cell.
Out of the cell, from high to low. Okay? And then in this one, where we've got 1% sugar inside and also 1% sugar outside the cell, which way is the sugar going to go?
both ways?
Equally in and out, right? To maintain that balance, to maintain that equilibrium. It goes equally in and out of the cell. Okay? So that's diffusion, right? You guys understand that? You're going down the concentration gradient from high to low. No energy required. Okay? So what about for number 3, filling in the blanks there? So the cell membrane is primarily made up of what 2 ingredients? Phospholipids and what?
Proteins.
And proteins. So phospholipids and proteins. Okay. And what about for number 4? The cell membrane is,
Semi?
yeah, you can say semi or selectively, means the same thing. So either one of those answers would be correct. The cell membrane is semi-permeable. The cell membrane is selectively permeable. And this means that that's right. Okay, so that means that it allows some substances to cross the membrane more easily than others. Perfect. Okay. I'm just going to get an eraser out of my bag. Looks like someone else is coming in. Hello. Do you have the packet? If you don't have it, go ahead and grab one. Okay. So now, just to summarize what we've been talking about here a bit, diffusion always causes particles to move from a region of
High?
high concentration
Low.
to low concentration. That means down the concentration gradient. And number 6, one more time, does the cell expend energy when molecules diffuse in or out of the cell?
No.
No. And what's it called?
Passive.
Right, no. It is passive transport.
Can you explain that? So passive, so it doesn't, you know what you're just saying because there's no energy.
Right, exactly.
No
Passive
ATP.
just means that there's no energy, no ATP is used in this process. And that's because the particles are going from high to low, down the concentration gradient. Okay, passive means no energy. Okay, so for more of an exercise here with these concepts, let's go ahead and do this fill in the blank exercise on the back of the first page. So, just erase this so we can have room. All right, so do you guys know what the other word for a cell membrane is? It starts with a P.
Plasma.
Plasma, yeah. Pretty good. Okay, the cell membrane is also called the plasma membrane and is made of a phospholipid, yeah, bilayer. Remember that phospholipid bilayer? All right, the phospholipids have hydrophilic heads.
Which are on the outside?
Yep, that are on the outside. Okay, and hydrophobic tails. And that's the bilayer, the hydrophilic heads and the hydrophobic tails. Okay, embedded in the phospholipid bilayer are proteins that may aid in diffusion. Okay, so let's talk about what things can cross easily. So what's the answer for number 6? Small,
Is it polar?
uncharged, okay? Small, uncharged molecules pass into or out of the cell easily by a process called
Osmosis?
diffusion. Yeah, diffusion. And diffusion is called
Passive?
passive transport. Here you go, Dory. We got some space here. You're okay there? All right. Yeah, we're kind of turned around backwards here. It was a little bit strangely oriented. Okay, and then so for number 8, diffusion is called, once again,
Passive?
passive transport, right? You're not going to forget this stuff, right? All this redundancy. And so diffusion is called passive transport, which does not require energy or ATP. Okay, because the water molecules, the water or molecules are moving down the concentration gradient. Good. Okay. Charged atoms such as ions. Good. Remember those ions back from chapter 2? Charged atoms such as ions and large molecules cannot pass through the membrane easily and need the help of what kind of proteins? What are they called?
Translation.
What?
Transport.
Transport. That's right, Tori. Transport proteins. Transport
Is
proteins.
it also known as special? Because we saw on a quiz.
Special channel proteins?
Yeah.
Channel proteins, that's a type of transport protein. Channel proteins, transport proteins,
Okay.
they do the same thing. They allow things that cannot move easily across the membrane. Okay. Okay, so and then what's that process called? If you have charged atoms, such as ions and large molecules that cannot pass the membrane easily and need the help of transport proteins to cross the membrane via the process of, what's that called? Facilitated diffusion. So remember, that's facilitated diffusion, which is the same as regular diffusion, in that you don't need energy in the form of ATP. You're still moving your particles from high to low, but these are the particles that are large or charged. and they cannot cross the membrane without help, so they need to be facilitated by that channel protein or a transport protein.
So this requires ATP.
No, it doesn't,
Oh,
no.
no.
No ATP required, it's still passive transport. It just needs the help of that protein. It's facilitated, this kind of diffusion is facilitated by the transport protein to move ions or ions or large molecules across the membrane, okay? With active transport that requires energy, we're going to talk about it here on the bottom. You're moving molecules from low to high. That's the only way that you're going to need energy, is to move molecules from low concentration to high against the concentration gradient.
From low to high or high to low?
From low to high for active transport.
High.
Okay, Matthew was asking me about
Okay.
needing energy for facilitated diffusion. I said, no, you don't need energy for this. You only need the transport protein because you're still moving your molecules from high to low. Okay, active transport, the opposite of diffusion, needs the energy because you're moving stuff from low to high against the concentration gradient. Okay. So anybody have any more questions on that fill in the blank paragraph? And we're going to do osmosis. So what's osmosis? How would you define osmosis?
The diffusion of water from the
Yeah.
membrane.
Exactly, the diffusion of water. Osmosis is the passive movement or the diffusion of water across the membrane. Okay? And so in which way does water move across the membrane? Up or down the concentration gradient? Down, right? It's passive. It's still a type of diffusion, but it's just the movement of water down the concentration gradient. Okay? So we have some pictures here of cells, and we have to figure out which way is the water going to go. So in this cell, this is the nucleus, that's what that little circle is in the middle. And the picture is 98% water, okay? And the outside environment is 95% water. So which way is the water going to go? Into the cell or out of the cell? Out, right? Because we're going from, water is going from where there's more water to less water, right? We're still going down the concentration gradient. So water leaves the cell. In the next cell, we have an internal environment of 98% water, just like the last cell. But the outside environment is 98% water as well. So which way is the water going to go?
Both directions.
Both directions, equally in and out, to maintain that equilibrium of water concentration. And in the last example, we have a cell that has an internal environment of that same 98% water concentration, and the outside of the cell is 100% water. So which way is water going to go? Into the cell, from high to low. Okay? All right, well now the next questions here refer to tonicity. So it's all about what is going to happen to a plant or animal cell when it's exposed to different kinds of solutions, right? And those terms are, the solution could be isotonic, it could be hypotonic, or it could be hypertonic, okay? Just before we go through all that, let's review what those terms mean. Isotonic means what? Make sure. The same, right? The same concentration, okay? Like this would be an example of isotonic, right? Okay, because you got the same concentration on both sides of the membrane. Hypertonic means what? More
outside?
More of what though?
Solute?
Solute, so not water, but more solutes, okay? So to match one of these to that, you also have to consider the concentration of the solute that was in here. So let's just say that the only other thing in this cell was salt. Okay, so what percentage would be left of salt in this case? 2%, okay. So just giving you guys an extra example here. So 2% salt inside, And what about outside? If there's 95% water and the only other thing in there is salt, how much is it going to be salt? 5%. Okay. And we already said that this was isotonic because you've got 98% water and 2% salt, and then the same thing, 98% water, 2% salt. Water equally moves in and out. But what about for this one? So if we got 98% water, how much salt in the cell?
2%.
2% salt. And how much salt outside the cell? There's only 100% outside. There's 100% of water outside the cell. How much salt? 0. 0% salt. No salt there. Pure water, like still water. Okay? So let's consider that. So which of these cells has more, where do you have more solutes? Okay, which one will be a hypertonic solution? So the solution is the environment outside the cell. Which one is hypertonic?
First one?
This one, right? This one has more solute in the solution than in the cell. Okay? So this right here is an example of a hypertonic solution. Okay, it's got more solutes than the environment that's inside the cell. Hypo means what?
Less?
Low, right? Hypo means low or less solute. So this right here, this solution outside the cell would be an example of a hypotonic solution, right? It has very low, really no solute. Okay? So that's what those words mean. Iso means same, hyper means more, and hypo means low. And what you're referring to here is solute, so dissolved sugars or salts. So to answer these questions here, what about number 1? Solution in which the solute concentration is the same as the cell. Isotonic, right? That's pretty easy. So letter A, isotonic. Number 2, solution with a lower solute concentration. Hypotonic, right? Hypo means low. Letter C for number 2. Number 3, solution with a higher solute concentration. Hypertonic.
B.
Yep, letter B for number 3. Okay, and then talking about what happens to both animal cells and blood cells in these environments. Number 4, what's the best condition for animal cells? Isotonic, letter A for number 4. Animal cells require an isotonic environment. What about number 5? What solution would cause a red blood cell to burst or to lyse? Hypotonic. Hypotonic, because take a look at what's happening here. If this is an animal cell, and it's in a hypotonic solution, it's going to gain water. And because that animal cell doesn't have a cell wall, it bursts, it lyses. Okay? Number 6, a plant cell that loses turgor pressure must have been exposed to what kind of solution? Hypertonic. Because a hypertonic environment causes a cell to lose water, right? Lose water, and so a plant cell loses that turgor pressure. Okay, so this is an example of a cell in a hypertonic environment losing water.
What is turgor?
Turgor means that it is turgid, it's swollen with water, it's full of water. Okay, so we're gonna talk about this in the next question. So number 7, a plant cell with good turgor pressure is in what kind of solution? Hypotonic, right? A plant cell that's full of water and has turgor pressure or is turgid, its cell wall is like bursting. It's not bursting, but it's swollen with water. It doesn't burst because of the cell wall, but it's just full, it's turgid. There's a lot of turgor pressure because of all that water swelling that cell. Okay, that happens in a hypotonic environment in a plant. And what about for number, yes?
Can you say that again? So 6 was B, is that right? And 7 is C?
6 is B, a plant cell loses turgor pressure in a hypertonic environment. And number 7, plant cell with good turgor pressure is letter C. Yep, hypotonic. And then number 8, a red blood cell will dehydrate or shrivel in what sort of a solution? Hypertonic, because a hypertonic solution causes a cell to lose water. A blood cell will shrivel whereas a plant cell will plasmolyze. It will undergo plasmolysis. Okay? So those are going to be the kinds of things you want to be able to differentiate between when you're answering questions regarding tonicity. Okay? Tonicity is all about what kind of solution is going to cause the cell to gain or lose water.
Is that only with osmosis?
Yes, it's all about osmosis. It's all about osmosis. Notice that we haven't been talking about the solutes moving. We've only been talking about the water being gained or lost or equally moving in and out. That's what osmosis is, the movement of water. Okay. All right. So the last question here, the last few questions here on the bottom refer to this figure on the bottom right. And so the first question is, what type of transport is represented by this picture? You'll notice that the arrows are moving these little molecules into the cell. Okay. So how many molecules do you see out of the cell to begin with? Just one. And how many molecules do you see inside the cell? Like 5 or 6, right? So you're moving your molecules from low to high, right? So what kind of transport is that? Active transport. That's what's pictured there, is active transport. And so in which direction is the movement occurring? Into the cell or out of the cell? Into the cell. What energy is being used?
ATP.
ATP. Very good. And you can see that in the bottom of the figure. The ATP is being used to drive those molecules across that little channel there, okay, which is the answer to the next question. What else is needed in addition to ATP? What's that little structure called that the particles are moving between? Yeah, the transport protein or the channel protein. Yep. Transport proteins are required.
Are you going to go into exocytosis or endocytosis? Would that be considered active?
Exocytosis and endocytosis are types of active transport. So all of those processes require energy. Okay? Endocytosis is bringing things into the cell. Examples of endocytosis are cellular eating. Remember what that's called? What's cellular eating called? Phagocytosis. Okay? And then cellular drinking is called kynocytosis. Okay? So all of those are types of active transport. I'm not going to get into it too much. And the other kind of active transport is exocytosis, which is kicking things out of the cell, things leaving the cell, whereas endocytosis, like phago and pinocytosis, are all about bringing things into the cell. Okay?
And they all require...
They all require energy and transport proteins. All types of active transport require energy and ATP and the transport proteins to move those molecules from low to high concentration against the concentration gradient. Okay. Okay. So the next questions here are labeling of this figure. There might be some of that on the test that you guys might see. So be prepared for being able to interpret it. It'll look a lot better than this figure in this review sheet, which I know is kind of grainy. But you can see the arrows and which ways they are going. So let's go ahead and label what these things are. A, B, C, D, E, and F. Okay. So this row here of cells, what kind of cells are those? Are they animal cells or plant cells? Animal cells. And then this row here, what kind of cells are those? Plant cells. Okay, so for column C, we see water moving equally in and out of both the animal cell and the plant cell. So what kind of a solution must they be in? Isotonic. For column D, we see water entering the cell. So what kind of solution would cause the cell to gain water? Hypotonic. Good. And then in column E, we see water leaving the cell, cells becoming dehydrated. So what kind of a solution would dehydrate the cell? Hypertonic. And then letter F is pointing to something happening. What is that? I know it's kind of hard to see, but
Plasmolysis.
it's plasmolysis. So the cell membrane is plasmolyzed.
And also shrivel.
You can, yeah. So it's shriveling, but it's the best word is plasmolysis. Plasmolized or plasmolysis. Which means that the cell membrane is not only shriveled, but it is kind of pulled away from the cell wall. It is pulled away from the cell wall. Cell membrane is plasmolized. Like you'll see that the cell wall is sort of shriveled, but this most dramatic thing that happens to a plant cell in a hypertonic environment is that it plasmolyzes. The cell membrane rips away from the cell wall. Okay. Okay, anybody have any more questions about that tonicity, cell membrane stuff? Because we're going to talk about these energy reactions before we get into the respiration photosynthesis stuff. Yes?
I have a question. I don't really get the whole tonicity, like with the whole more solute and less solute.
Okay, so let me just put a couple of just new examples on the board so we can do more practice with that. So you have to know, basically tonicity is all about whether a solution is going to gain or lose water. And that's sometimes what's confusing about it is that the solution in question can be in reference to the environment in the cell, or it can be in reference to the environment outside the cell, okay? To reduce that confusion on my exams, I will only talk about what's going to happen to the cell when placed in a certain kind of a solution, hypertonic, hypotonic, isotonic, okay? So there won't be, solution in the cell versus out of the cell, what's going to happen, you know what I mean? Are you in the lab class? No, okay, because there's there's something like that in the lab packet for cell membrane that sort of makes that a bit more confusing than it has to be. And so to try to reduce that confusion, I try to refer to basically what is the cell going to do in these different environments. Is it going to gain water, lose water, or equally gain and lose water? Okay, so let's do another couple examples about tonicity here. So this is a beaker, and it's got a cell inside of it. And inside the cell, we have a solution that's 95% water and 5% sugar. Okay. In the solution, let's say that we have the solution outside the cell has 80% water and 20% sugar. Okay. So I'm just gonna, let's see, I was just gonna ask you about this, all right? So what do you think? Is this cell gonna gain water or lose water? Which way is the water gonna go? Into the cell or out of the cell? Okay, well take a look. We've got more water in the cell than outside the cell. Remember that? So with osmosis, water moves from high to low. So water's going to move out of the cell, right? The cell's going to lose water because there's more solute outside of the cell than inside. Remember that? So if there's more solute outside of the cell than inside, what kind of a solution is this? What kind of a solution? Is it hyper, hypo, or iso? It's definitely not iso.
Hyper.
So more solute in the solution. What's more solute?
Oh, hyper.
Hyper, yeah. So consider that. So the solution in the beaker is a hypertonic solution. Okay? Solution in beaker is hypertonic. A hypertonic solution dehydrates cells. It causes them to lose water. And the reason is that, number one, there's more water inside the cell than outside. And also, there's more solute outside of the cell than inside. Okay, so that's why. Well, let's do another one, okay? And anybody can answer this question. All right, so here's another beaker, and a cell is inside of it, and let's just say we have 75% water and 25% sugar, okay? And the external environment in the solution is 90% water and only 10% sugar. Okay, which way is the water going to move here? Okay, into the cell, right? From the area in which there's more water to less water. And that also means that you have more solute in the cell than outside. So the solution has very low solute. So this solution that has a whole lot of water and very little solute is called what? Hypotonic. Okay? So solution in beaker is hypotonic, and it causes the cell to gain water. If it was an animal cell, what would happen? It would burst or lyse, right? And if it was a plant cell, what would happen?
Oh, good, be good.
It would have what? A plant cell would have what once it gains a whole lot of water? That turgor pressure. It'd be turgid, it'd be full of water. Okay? Alright, so animal cells and plant cells. Animal cells will shrivel in a hypertonic solution. They'll lose water. Plant cells will plasmolyze. They lose water. Animal cells would burst or lyse in a hypotonic environment. Plant cells would have turgor pressure in a hypotonic environment. Okay? Is that helpful? You have to consider the concentration of water and sugar on both sides of the membrane. Okay? A hypertonic solution has more solute in that solution than inside the cell. Okay? A hypotonic solution has less solute in the solution than inside the cell. Okay. You can think of it as two ways. When you're thinking about the movement of water, you can either think of it as water going from where there's more water to less water, or you can think of it as water goes to where there's more solute. Okay, either one of those works, no matter which way you look at it. Okay. All right. Okay, so the next question in the review handout is about the exergonic versus endergonic reaction. So what's the difference of an exergonic and an endergonic reaction?
I'd say exergonic is releases energy.
That's right. An exergonic reaction releases energy. Okay. And an endergonic reaction does what? Yeah, it absorbs and stores energy. So you can say requires and stores energy, or you can say absorbs and stores energy. Okay. What was an example of an exergonic reaction that we talked about? What's a process that comes right out of chapter 6 that releases energy, right? Respiration, cellular respiration. Think about it. You eat food, and food is very rich in stored potential chemical energy. And through the process of cellular respiration, your body uses oxygen to split up those food molecules, and then you're transferring that energy from food into what? Into ATP, right? Into energy in the form of ATP. So you're releasing energy from food in ATP. And that ATP powers everything that we are all doing right now. Thinking and writing, and I'm talking, some of you guys are talking too as we go through the answers. And all of that stuff is powered by the ATP that's being released from our food through an exergonic reaction.
Could you also say, like, in a fireplace burning wood?
Of course, yep, and that's the other example, burning wood. Because that wood is very rich in stored potential chemical energy, that resulted from photosynthesis. And when you light that wood on fire, it burns for a while, so the heat is released in the form of heat, right? The energy is released in the form of heat. And eventually that energy is all used up and the fire burns out. Right?
Heat and light.
What is it?
Heat and light.
Heat and light, yes, true. Heat and light are released. And an example of an endergonic reaction is what process?
Photosynthesis.
Yeah, photosynthesis. Absorbing energy in what form? What is the source of the energy that gets absorbed?
Sunlight.
Sunlight. So that energy gets absorbed and then it gets stored. What does it get stored in? The molecule what?
Thylakoids?
What's the end product? Carbohydrates, right? Like what? What's the end point of photosynthesis? What's the key molecule? Glucose, that all of our food can be traced back to. So sunlight gets absorbed by the plants and then that energy from the sun eventually gets stored in the molecules of sugar that the plant makes through photosynthesis. So that's an endergonic reaction, absorbs and stores energy. It yields energy-rich products that are rich in potential energy. Okay. And remember we had done that other worksheet in class where you had the graph and then you had to label, but you probably won't see a graphic representation of those questions on the test. It'll be more so words. What kind of reaction releases energy, what kind of reaction absorbs and stores energy, and so on. Okay? So are we ready to move to the energy converting processes now that we've sort of introduced talking about them here in transitions a little bit? Okay, so we're going to go ahead to the back of the second page and talk about cellular respiration. I think that this is I made this worksheet. Some of the worksheets I kind of just find from other places and I use them, but this one is something that I made to really kind of help break the stuff down a little bit. And of course, that activity that we did in the classroom where we documented where each stage of photosynthesis happens and what goes in and out of each stage, that's really important too and really helpful and sort of really simplifying the whole process. So be sure to review that as well. Okay, so let me just get a clean board here so we can start fresh with just cellular respiration concepts. Okay, so number one, during glycolysis, glucose is first split into two molecules of what? Pyruvates. Right? During glycolysis, glycolysis means glycolysis. You're splitting glucose. It's all about splitting glucose into pyruvate. And so each of those two molecules of pyruvate then enter what reaction? It's called what? Transition reaction. To be prepared for entry into what stage? The citric acid cycle. Okay? So you guys got that? So during glycolysis, glucose is first split into two molecules of pyruvate, which then enter the transition reaction to be prepared for entry into the citric acid cycle. Okay? So what about glycolysis? Number two, glycolysis produces a net gain of only two ATP molecules per molecule of glucose by what kind of respiration is that? Glycolysis. Anaerobic. Anaerobic respiration.
Is that with or without?
So what does this mean, guys? With or without oxygen?
Without.
Without oxygen. And I think we're going to get there at one point. Okay, but yes, anaerobic means without oxygen. Glycolysis is the stage of respiration that does not require oxygen. Okay. Number three, glycolysis occurs where? Right, it doesn't happen in the mitochondria. No, it happens in the cytoplasm. For number four, The second and third stages that are involved in aerobic cellular respiration are called what? So the second stage, you already told me before, what's the second stage called? The citric acid cycle. And what? What's the third stage? The electron transport system. Okay. Produce a net gain of how many molecules of ATP? Both total. So what's the total from here plus the total from here? What does that give you? Just the total from those two stages produce how many ATPs?
Two.
Well, this produces two, right? And how many does this produce? How many does this stage produce? 30 how? 30 what?
32.
32. Don't doubt yourself, you're knowing it. So then these two stages together produce how many ATPs? 34. 34 molecules of ATP. Okay? And where do these stages occur? And occur in the mitochondria. Yeah. Okay, so remember that. Glycolysis produces 2, right? Citric acid cycle produces 2. Electron transport system produces 32. Okay? And when we get to number 8, I'm going to ask you how many molecules of ATP are produced by all 3 stages. Okay? But we'll get there in question 8. Okay? But considering this, for number 5, okay, what kind of respiration is more efficient than the other kind? Considering that this respiration makes only 2, and the processes of aerobic respiration involve all this, right? So what would you guys say for number 5?
Aerobic.
So aerobic respiration is a more efficient producer of energy than anaerobic respiration. Yeah. Okay. Definitely. The process of respiration is much more efficient when you use oxygen versus not using oxygen. And for number 6, all of the electrons and hydrogen atoms released in stages 1 and 2 enter the electron transport chain. Yep. Enter the electron transport chain, which supplies the energy needed for the formation of what molecules? ATP. Exactly. Okay. And then number 7, most of the carbon dioxide is released during what stage? That's important. When is most of the carbon dioxide released? It is during the citric acid cycle. Okay. We started off with 6 carbons in glucose, right? We lost 2 of those carbon dioxides during the transition reaction, but it's during the citric acid cycle that the rest of the 4 carbon dioxides get released. Okay. So definitely citric acid cycle there. And the water is released during what stage? When is water formed and released? When is the water? Electron transport system. Okay. And then for number 8, how many molecules of ATP are produced by all 3 stages of respiration? What's our grand total? 36, right? 2 from glycolysis, 2 from citric acid, and 32 from electron transport. All totals to 36. What about number 9? Fermentation is what kind of process? Is it aerobic or anaerobic? Anaerobic. Yep, fermentation is anaerobic respiration that's performed by yeast cells. And it enables cells to produce ATP without oxygen. Fermentation is an anaerobic process which allows cells to produce ATP without oxygen. And which of the 3 stages of cellular respiration is the most primitive or ancient? And give me 2 reasons why. I like to ask that as an extra credit question. Hint, hint, hint.
Glycolysis.
Glycolysis is the most primitive and ancient. Okay, why? 2 reasons.
Because it's anaerobic.
Because it's anaerobic, it doesn't require oxygen, which was not available on the early primitive Earth. Okay, no oxygen required. And what's the second reason? What else does glycolysis not require?
Energy.
No, it does require energy. Remember, you gotta spend some ATP to do it. What else? What else indicates it being occurred? Think about where it happens. Glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm.
Oh, it was prokaryotic.
Yeah, and so the cytoplasm is in every kind of cell, whether it's prokaryotic or eukaryotic, every kind of cell has cytoplasm. But what kind of cells have mitochondria? Only eukaryotic. So what is a mitochondria a type of? Remember, it was all about chapter 4, organelles, right? So glycolysis doesn't need organelles. Think about that. Doesn't need organelles. Doesn't need mitochondria. It happens in the cytoplasm. Doesn't need organelles. Occurs in cytoplasm. Every kind of cell has cytoplasm. Mitochondria only came about in the eukaryotic cells. Okay, so nobody should miss that as an extra credit question. Glycolysis, why? It's anaerobic, it doesn't need oxygen. You could even just tell me it doesn't need oxygen. And it doesn't need organelles. Okay? Pretty cool. Okay, so let's go through this little review of photosynthesis. It's similar to the one that we did in class, but it's a bit shorter and it's a little bit easier perhaps, but it's just more practice. So remember how we did one very similar to like this in class at the end of the lecture last Thursday? So it's not the same. It's not the same. Okay, it's a little bit different. Okay, so let's fill in the blanks here. So the process by which plants use light energy from the sun, so light energy from the sun to make food is called photosynthesis. This process occurs within dark green structures that are called chloroplasts, which lie within a plant's leaves. Okay? The green pigment in the chloroplast, called chlorophyll, traps light energy. Yeah, chlorophyll. All right, this light energy is changed into glucose and stored. A plant absorbs what from the air? Carbon dioxide. A plant absorbs carbon dioxide from the air and what from the soil? Water. The plant uses some of its stored chemical energy to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. Do you remember what that's called? There's a special word for that. The splitting of water. Specifically for photosynthesis. It's called photolysis. Remember that? It's in the lecture. Photolysis, the splitting of water into hydrogen and oxygen. So what about number 9? Most of the blank is released into the air and is used by animals. Oxygen. Most of the oxygen is released into the air and used by animals. The hydrogen and carbon dioxide combine and form a simple sugar called, we're just looking for glucose here. Yeah, glucose, which the plant may store or use for energy. Oh, I see. Back here, you guys were saying chemical energy, right?
Yeah.
Which is not incorrect. That's definitely correct. It's more general. So yeah, we can keep that as chemical energy to fill in all those blanks. So which one was that? This light energy is changed into chemical energy and stored. Okay, it wouldn't be incorrect to say glucose. It is, because glucose is a type of chemical energy. Okay, this light energy is changed into chemical energy and stored, then we can use glucose down there. But glucose is chemical energy, so it's not incorrect. Okay, and so the process of photosynthesis. So, and remember I had said it's really helpful to go ahead and write out the equation on your test right when you get it. You get to write on your test. You might as well 4 things that you know right on your test when you get it, right? So hopefully by now you can just list off the reactants and products of photosynthesis. So what is it, guys? Let's hear it. So what does a plant need from the environment in order to make its own food?
Sunlight and water.
Carbon dioxide and
Sunlight.
water and sunlight. And then those 3 reactants are turned into what? Glucose, C6H12O6. And what's released? Oxygen gas. Okay. Carbon dioxide, water, sunlight gets transformed into sugar, glucose, a type of chemical energy, and oxygen gas gets released. And what kind of a reaction is this? Exergonic? Endergonic, that's right, endergonic. Endergonic reaction. Absorbs and stores energy. So now we're going to do the reverse, and we're going to talk about respiration. So next page with the horsey on it.
Just remember that. And
You don't have to draw plants, no way.
That's easy.
I would just say, I would just write that on your test as soon as you get it, as well as the formula for respiration. Because then when you're seeing questions like, which one uses carbon dioxide, or which one uses oxygen, or which one produces carbon dioxide, or which one produces oxygen, you can kind of quickly refer back to that, instead of just getting all jumbled up,
Why don't we have a cheat?
You don't have a cheat sheet. You don't have a cheat sheet. Once you get your test, you can write on it. So why not just dump things that you're, needing to remember on your test? Why not? You're not bringing a cheat sheet. But if you've got it in your head, just go ahead and put it down and just refer. It'll take some of the pressure off of you a little bit. Okay. All right, so this respiration, fill in the blank. Plants make their own food through photosynthesis, just what we've been talking about, right? Photosynthesis. And animals get food when they eat plants or other animals. Plants and animals use the energy from food to carry out life processes. Okay, a plant or animal, each cell needs energy, which it gets through respiration. Respiration occurs within cellular structures called mitochondria. During respiration, a cell uses, what does it use to release energy from something? Oxygen. The cell uses oxygen to release energy from, what are we using oxygen to release energy from? What does all of our food get traced back to? All of the food that you eat can be traced back to glucose. So you're using oxygen to break up that glucose molecule, okay? So remember that, guys. So right now, hopefully you guys ate lunch, and you're breathing oxygen, and the oxygen is traveling through your bloodstream down to your mitochondria. and then it's being used to help break up those molecules of glucose. The hydrogen atoms are transferring through the different stages of respiration, and then they're eventually going to that oxygen that's waiting there, right? In the last stage, electron transport, to receive those hydrogen atoms. Remember that? And that's when the hydrogen and oxygen come together and the water is formed. That's why after you eat lunch, you gotta go to the bathroom, right? Release some urine, get rid of that water, okay? All that kind of stuff, right? You now have energy to be able to take a test and study and walk and stuff because you're making ATP out of that process, using the oxygen to unleash the energy from glucose, okay? So a cell uses oxygen to release energy from glucose. Two byproducts of this process are water and carbon dioxide. Water and carbon dioxide are the two waste byproducts. We release the water through our sweat and urine. We release the carbon dioxide every time we exhale. Okay? Some of the energy produced during respiration gets stored in molecules called ATP, right? That's the whole purpose of the process of respiration, is to make molecules of ATP. The chemical energy in that glucose is being transferred to that chemical energy in ATP, which powers all of that cellular work. Everything that you guys do, your heartbeat, your brain activity, writing, walking, everything is powered by ATP. Okay? However, some of the energy is lost, right, in the form of what? Heat, which helps to keep an organism warm. Right? And then for letter B down here, complete the following to show what happens within a cell during respiration. So this is the other thing that you want to be able to list out, right? I mean, you can even use words and not necessarily the symbols, whatever you like best. So oxygen plus glucose, so C6H12O6 are the reactants of respiration, and these get broken down and converted to what? Carbon dioxide plus water plus ATP. Okay? And respiration is what kind of a process? Endergonic or exergonic? Exergonic. Here's our energy being released in the form of ATP. Okay? It's very helpful to refer to that on the test. It's just up to you to write it down there when you get it. Okay? All right, any questions so far? We got one more page left to go from the back. So more photosynthesis, and then we're going to compare the processes. Okay, so now this number 1 is pretty much a direct question that relates to the whole reactance of photosynthesis. So number 1, what do autotrophs require from the environment in order to make their own food? First, do you guys remember what autotrophs are? They're self-feeders, and they feed themselves by performing photosynthesis. So what do autotrophs require from the environment in order to make their own food? 3 things. Sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. Perfect, right? And see, if you had a question like that, you could always refer to this and be like, oh, there it is. Hooray. I didn't have to think about that, right? Sunlight, water, carbon dioxide. How about number 2? This is sort of a critical thinking question, and it's also sort of common sense. How do humans and other organisms benefit from autotrophs? Okay, they're the source of food, right? Food. All of our food can be traced back to that glucose made by plants. What else? What else do humans need to survive?
Oxygen.
Oxygen. Okay. Food. Oxygen. That doesn't end there, though. Think about some other things.
Medicine.
Okay, yeah, source of medicines. That's true. Very high percentage of all medicines are derived from plants. Clothing, very good, right? Humans have very little body hair. And we need to make clothing out of plants, right? Cotton is a plant. And before we started making synthetic fabrics like polyester and nylon and stuff, those are synthetic things. Do you guys know that polyester and nylon are made of oil, like petroleum? They're made of petrochemicals. They're made of oil, you know, like fossil fuel oil. I'd much rather wear cotton than oil. Yes.
Do you know why we ended up losing the majority of our body hair?
It became non-adaptive because we were so intelligent that we made clothing. We wore animal skins and stuff like that. We didn't need it, right? So it slowly started becoming, it would kind of, it's called genetic drift. It's an evolutionary term. It's called random genetic drift. And basically it wasn't helpful and it sort of started to decline over thousands and thousands of years. That's right, exactly. Like your lactose tolerance versus intolerance. There's one more thing I'm looking for here. One more thing I'm fishing for. So humans like to have a protective covering over them, right? Shelter, right? So when you think about something that everything needs to survive, humans need to survive. They need food, clothing, oxygen, shelter, medicines to extend your life and keep you healthy. But yeah, shelter, right? What do we build? Before we started making concrete and stuff, what did we build shelters out of? Plants, right? Wood, plants, leaves. Okay, think about like a Native American chickee hut, right? Where you've got lumber, you know, like basically tree trunks as the things that hold it up, and you've got the cabbage palm fronds being the roof. Okay, shelter. Okay, definitely important. Okay, so for number 3, where do the reactants of photosynthesis reach or enter the plant? Okay. Okay, well let's talk about them one by one. So first let's redo our reactants. So for number 3, we're talking about the reactants. You guys already told me, right? Sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. And so now I want to know what exact part of the plant do those reactants go in, okay? So let's talk about the sunlight. So where does the sunlight enter the plant? What specifically absorbs the sunlight? Be more specific than the leaves. The pores? No, not the pores. The chlorophyll pigments. Yes, the chlorophyll pigments. And now we can get a little bit more broad here. So chlorophyll pigment. And where is that chlorophyll pigment? Chlorophyll pigment, which is in what? More specific. The thylakoids of the chloroplast. So the sunlight is absorbed by the chlorophyll pigment in the thylakoids of chloroplast. Okay? So the most specific thing that captures the sunlight is the chlorophyll. That's a pigment. And the chlorophyll pigment is in the thylakoids. And those thylakoids are in the chloroplast. Okay? The other ones are much easier to answer. Okay? The water. How does a plant absorb water? Through its roots. Nice and easy. Roots. You probably knew that since elementary school. Okay? Carbon dioxide. How does that enter the plant? This is where the pores come in. The stomata. The stomata. Those are those tiny pores in the leaf that allow the carbon dioxide in. Very important. Okay. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and summarize the main stage of the photosynthesis. So this is exactly like what we did in class with respiration. So we're going to list the stages and list where they occur and what goes in and out of each stage. Okay? So let's see. So first stage, second stage, leave it here. Where does it happen? What goes in? What goes out? In, out. Okay, so the first stage of photosynthesis is called what?
Reaction.
The light reactions. Perfect. Okay. Where does it happen? Where does it happen? In the thylakoids of the chloroplast, right? You guys already told me that sunlight is captured by that pigment, the thylakoid. So where does it happen? In the thylakoids of the chloroplast. What enters the light reactions? There are two important reactants in the light reactions. What are they? Remember? Well, we're talking about the light reaction, so one of them has to be sunlight. Sunlight and what though? What else comes in here? No, not yet. Not carbon dioxide, not yet. Water. Water. Sunlight and water enter the process, right? Remember that the sunlight stimulates the electrons in the chlorophyll, which are then bounced between photosystems. And as they bounce from photosystem 2 to photosystem 1, that huge starburst of ATP is formed, right? And then the water gets split by that process of photolysis. The oxygen gas gets released, and the hydrogen atoms get picked up by NADPH. Okay? So what goes out? What goes out of the process? Okay, oxygen definitely gets released into the external environment. We're breathing it in. Okay, what else? What's the two types of energy currency that are released by this process? ATP and? NADPH. That's right, NADPH. The second stage is called what? The dark reactions or the Calvin cycle. Calvin cycle or dark reactions. And where does that happen? What part of the chloroplast does it happen in? Where does the Calvin cycle happen? The what? It sounds kind of like that.
Oh, the stoma.
Not the stoma, it means a single pore. So what's the word for stroma? Stroma of the chloroplast. I know, and that's why I told you guys that when on the test, I will only ever refer to those pores as the stomata in their plural form, okay? So that you don't get the words of stoma and stroma confused, okay? Stroma is a part of the chloroplast. That's where the Calvin cycle happens. A stoma is one pore. Many pores are stomata, okay? Stroma of the chloroplast is where the Calvin cycle happens. Okay, so what's going to go in here? Carbon dioxide. That's the last prime reactant of photosynthesis we haven't considered yet, carbon dioxide. And what else comes in here from the light reactions? The energy, right? The ATP and the NADPH. Because remember that the Calvin cycle is like a sugar factory. And just like any factory, factories need energy to run. So the source of energy for the sugar factory is the ATP and NADPH that was manufactured at the light reactions. Okay? What goes out? Yeah, glucose. Glucose. Truly, at the end of the Calvin cycle, you're making that molecule called P-gal, and then P-gal, once the Calvin cycle turns 6 times, gets made into glucose and other carbohydrates. Okay? So So P-gal is what results from each turn of the Calvin cycle, but then 6 turns gives you glucose.
So how would you test? The test will be.
You need to know both. You need to know both. Okay?
Each
You
turn
need
of
to
the
know
Calvin.
that P-gal is produced during the Calvin cycle, and that P-gal is used to make glucose. Okay?
Can you say that again? It turns 6 times?
Yes, so at the end of each turn of the Calvin cycle, you make a molecule of P-gal. And once the Calvin cycle turns 6 times, then those P-gal molecules become glucose. Okay?
So I'm guessing that which each turn gets you one molecule of carbon.
Yes, for each turn of the cycle only processes 1 carbon dioxide molecule at a time. Glucose is a 6-carbon compound, and so it's got to turn 6 times to give you the 6-carbon glucose. Okay?
And why 12 hydrogens?
Why 12 hydrogens? It's a matter of how many came in from the sun, from the water, for example, and then it's kind of about a balancing with the chemistry equations. We're not looking at it, but ultimately it's 12 hydrogens that you end up with. Okay. Okay. So that's how we would summarize photosynthesis. That makes it a bit more simple, right? It's kind of like when we do a respiration, it really kind of boils it down. What are the stages? Where do they happen? What goes in and out? Okay, so now, this is the back page of this worksheet is generally sort of the toughest, the biggest challenge, because it requires you to not only tell me what each of these concepts relate to, either respiration or photosynthesis, but then also tell me what stage is it does this happen during. So this is really cool. And you will see some questions like this, of course, in multiple choice form. Okay. So let's see here. So splitting of glucose.
Respiration.
When does that happen?
Respiration.
Splitting of glucose, right? That's definitely respiration. And during what stage does that happen, the splitting of glucose? Glycolysis. Right? Glycolysis means the splitting of glucose. Glycolysis. Lysis means split. Splitting of water, when does that happen? Photosynthesis or respiration? Photosynthesis. And when does that happen? What stage? What stage of photosynthesis? The light reactions. You guys with me? See, this is where seeing those formulas written down would help, right? Referring to them. Okay. So carbon fixation, does that happen during photosynthesis or respiration? Photosynthesis. During what stage does carbon fixation occur? Calvin cycle, right? So, yeah, the dark reactions, Calvin cycle. Okay, so the carbon in carbon dioxide is being fixed, it's being made into molecules of glucose. That's what carbon fixation is. Okay, carbon and carbon dioxide is being made into glucose, into a carbohydrate. Thylakoid membrane. Photosynthesis, right? During what stage are the thylakoid membranes important? The light reactions. Pyruvate is formed. Is that respiration or photosynthesis?
Respiration.
Respiration. What stage? Glycolysis. Okay. Acetyl coenzyme A is broken down. What stage is that? Is that photosynthesis or respiration?
Respiration.
Respiration. What stage?
Citric acid?
The citric acid cycle. Very good. Oops. Citric acid cycle. Okay. Carbon dioxide is used, is that respiration or photosynthesis? Photosynthesis, what stage is the carbon dioxide used? The Calvin cycle. Oxygen is produced, respiration or photosynthesis? Photosynthesis, what stage? The light reactions. Mitochondria, respiration, definitely. And what stage or stages? 2 stages, right? What stages are the mitochondria involved in?
Citric acids.
Citric acid cycle and?
Electron transportation.
And electron transport.
Is it also in the waiting stage? Transition?
Yes, but the transition reaction is not one of the choices. Because it's not a real phase, it's a sub-phase. Citric acid cycle and electron transport, but yes, transition does happen in the mitochondria as well. Okay. Water is formed. Is that during photosynthesis or respiration? Respiration. What stage? Electron transport system. So remember that's when the oxygen is waiting in the electron transport system as the final electron acceptor. And so when those hydrogen atoms that are all brought to the electron transport system fall down the energy staircase, they're being drawn to that oxygen. And then the hydrogen and the oxygen come together and it forms water. That happens during electron transport system. Okay. All right, so cytoplasm. Cytoplasm, what's that involved in? Photosynthesis or respiration? Respiration, what stage? Glycolysis. Okay. And stroma. Better erase this here. Stroma. Respiration or photosynthesis? Photosynthesis. What stage? Calvin cycle.
And then you said that's part of the chloroplast?
Yes, the stroma is a region in the chloroplast. Glucose production. Photosynthesis or respiration? Photosynthesis. What stage is the glucose made? Calvin cycle. Carbon dioxide is produced. Respiration. What stage is most of the carbon dioxide produced?
Citric acid.
Yeah, the citric acid. Remember we talked about that a little bit earlier? We talked about how 2 carbon dioxides are made during transition, but most of it, 4, are released during the citric acid cycle. Right? So is that helpful? So you really want to try to think of it like that, you know, when you see those kinds of questions, during which stage does carbon fixation occur? Calvin cycle. Okay, during what stage is water molecules split? Light reactions. Okay, during what stage are water molecules produced? Electron transport system. Okay, I know it's a lot of very technical information, but once you get it, you get it. I have had students get their highest test grade ever on this test, even though I do think it is one of the more challenging ones. All right, I'm happy to take any other questions that you guys might have from the other review sheets. Otherwise, that's what I wanted to cover in this session.